In the 5th year of our relationship, Gabriel left me alone at the engagement banquet. He even asked someone to bring me a message specifically. You left me once, and I'm returning the favor. That's what fairness is all about. After that, he came to me as if nothing had happened to discuss the matters of the next engagement banquet. I slightly raised my eyebrows, ignoring his murderous gaze. I pulled over a little kid who was waiting aside with red eyes and kissed him. I casually replied, "But you're already out of the game." On the day of the engagement, I was waiting persistently at the hotel entrance in a white dress. The hands of the clock in the hotel had long passed 12. It had been a full 3 hours since the scheduled start time of the banquet, and my fiancé still hadn't shown up. During this time, I called him countless times. But Gabriel went from rejecting my calls at first to turning off his phone in the end. The guests present looked at each other, eyeing me and whispering among themselves. The gazes that fell on me were like sharp blades, piercing me from head to toe. My father clenched his fists and, with a solemn face, walked up to me with my mother. "Vivian, come home with me. There's no need to continue with this engagement." Gabriel's mother, who was waiting aside to contact Gabriel, became anxious. She quickly grabbed my mother's hand, trying to say some nice words to pacify her, but my mother, in a fit of rage, shook off her hand. She glanced at me subtly and then left with my father, whose face looked grim. Gabriel's mother didn't dare to stop them and could only turn to look at me for help. "Vivian," before she could finish, there were sudden exclamations from the crowd in the hall. Gabriel's mother and I turned our heads simultaneously. A video started playing on the large screen in the center of the stage. In a dim private room, Gabriel was holding a shy-looking girl. He lowered his head, wiping the kiss mark the girl left on his collarbone. The originally noisy banquet hall fell silent for a moment. Then there was an even louder buzz of discussion, with all kinds of rumors flying around. Facing those curious or mocking looks, I just felt a dull pain in my head. But the video continued. Only after wiping the kiss mark clean did Gabriel lazily look at the camera. He curled his lips and casually said, "You left me once, and I'm returning the favor. That's what fairness is all about." Gabriel and I were childhood sweethearts and had known each other for a full 24 years. Originally, our two families had similar financial situations, and our company businesses were also closely connected. Because of this, Gabriel and I had been engaged since we were young. We just had to wait until after graduation to enter the hall of marriage hand in hand. But 5 years ago, my father made 2 wrong decisions due to trusting the wrong people. As a result, our family's investments failed and our business began to decline. All kinds of forces were eyeing our company and its businesses covetously. To prop up the company, I resolutely chose to go abroad to further my studies and improve myself. After learning about this decision, Gabriel said nothing and just got himself drunk. "Vivian, why have I never been your top priority?" This was the first thing he said to me when I found him in a bar. He held my hand, calling my name intermittently. He murmured it countless times, and a sour feeling gradually welled up in my heart. "Vivian, for my sake, can you not go abroad?" After sobering up a bit, Gabriel held my hand, his face full of pleading. His voice was very nice. When he looked at you with wide eyes, he was like black grapes swaying in the wind on a midsummer night. When Gabriel said this pleading sentence, his eyes were red and swollen, just like an abandoned kitten. A wave of indescribable grief welled up in my heart. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, and my voice was so low that it was barely audible. "Gabriel, I'm sorry. Forgive me for not being able to promise you that." These words of refusal seemed to blow away Gabriel's drunkenness like a cold wind. His anger flared up and he suddenly started smashing things in the private room. In the fierce argument, I looked at him wearily and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you really have to force me to be a daughter only belonging to you?" Gabriel stared at me for a while. Finally, he left in silence, and I resolutely boarded a plane bound for a foreign country. This was the time he claimed I left him. This engagement banquet ultimately didn't end perfectly as expected. After explaining the reason to all the guests and returning all the gift money with apologies, I calmly announced that the engagement with Gabriel was hereby annulled. After everyone left, when facing Gabriel's mother, I lowered my eyes and blinked, and my eyes instantly welled up with tears. In the eyes of Gabriel's parents, this must have been a sign that I had suffered a great deal. She quickly stepped forward to hold my hand and comforted me kindly. Vivian, Auntie knows you've been wronged. Don't worry. The Gabriel family will definitely give you a satisfactory explanation for this matter. Perhaps to quell the anger of the Vivian family and try to continue this engagement. After the banquet, the Gabriel family successively gave us 3 highly profitable projects. My mother was very happy about this. She called me into the study and, pointing at a photo of Gabriel on the table, asked me, "Dear, do you still like this boy from the Gabriel family?" "Just so," I replied truthfully. "But I like money more. So far, marrying Gabriel can maximize the benefits I want. Because he's not smart enough and is even less good at running a company. After getting married, given enough time, the Gabriel family will be within my grasp. But if he's too stupid and harms my interests, I don't mind replacing him. There are more ways than just getting married to nibble away at the Gabriel group." Hearing this, my mother burst into laughter and lovingly stroked my head. She smiled meaningfully and said, "Dear, remember that when you want to achieve your goals, anything can be a weapon, including feelings. Life is still so long. Of course, you can freely like someone. But this kind of liking must never overshadow your ideals and ambitions." I lowered my eyes and pondered for a moment. Then I smiled at my mother, my eyes curving. "I understand, Mom." In the middle of the night, I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my abdomen while I was asleep. I opened my mouth and called for my parents a few times but got no response. Then I remembered that because of the fiasco at the engagement banquet, they had gone to a neighboring city to unwind. I curled up my body and struggled to reach for the phone on the bedside table. Suddenly, the phone rang, sounding unusually shrill in the quiet environment. I glanced at the phone screen, my hand trembling as I immediately tapped to answer the call. I tried my best to stay conscious, and the instinct for survival drove me to speak. "Gabriel, I have a stomachache. Come and take me to the hospital." As my words fell, a delicate female voice came from the other end of the phone. "Oh? Gabriel, I think I accidentally pressed your phone. And this sister said she has a stomachache and wants you to take her to the hospital. Just hang up. Being with you is more important now." After Gabriel's indifferent voice, the phone was hung up immediately. The next second, the phone vibrated again. It was a text message from him. "Vivian, if you apologize to me now, I'll come to see you." After barely managing to call the emergency number, I sank into darkness as my consciousness faded. When the cold liquid medicine flowed into my veins, Gabriel sent another message. "Since you're so busy and have cancelled our engagement, then I'll find someone to take care of me. Miss Vivian should have no objections, right?" Following that was a photo of him kissing a girl. I turned off my phone, lay on the hospital bed, and stared blankly at the ceiling in a daze. I racked my brains but couldn't figure out why Gabriel seemed to grow older but not wiser and hadn't made any progress at all. In recent years, under the impact of emerging industries, companies in the same circle have been undergoing transformation. Several families have been secretly fighting each other tooth and nail. The second-generation heirs who grew up with us have all received various trainings. One after another, they have plunged into this war without gunpowder smoke. Under such circumstances, only Gabriel remained the same as always. All he could think about was love affairs. It seemed that such a man really wasn't worth having any expectations for anymore. After reporting to my parents that I was okay, I took out my phone, found the contact, and sent a message. "Kiddo, come to the hospital and keep me company now." Then I sent him the address right away. The reply came almost instantly. "Sister, wait for me. I'll be there right away." In less than half an hour, Julian arrived at the hospital. He came in a hurry, panting from running, but the soup container he was carrying didn't spill a drop. Julian had an exceptionally handsome and otherworldly face. Just standing there, he could easily attract the attention of people around him. I rested my chin on my hand and looked at him, couldn't help sighing that he was really a sight for sore eyes. No wonder in these 5 years, while Gabriel kept telling me how much he missed me, he also had a constant stream of female companions. Young, energetic, good-looking, and also caring, satisfying all your preferences. Who wouldn't like that? How come you have a stomachache? Did you drink too much again during a business dinner? The evening breeze carried a bit of damp coolness. His black hair was scattered on his fair forehead, and his eyes were shining brightly and purely. They reflected the whole of me. The love and worry of the young man were so sincere without a trace of impurity. I couldn't help being a bit dazed. Julian originally worked part-time in the painting studio that I opened casually for fun to earn living expenses. That day, when I had drunk too much during a business dinner and went to the painting studio to rest, I accidentally kissed him when he came to help me after I was tripped by an easel. Julian's face started to turn red, like a little wife who had been molested. He pretended to be calm but still couldn't help stuttering, This is just an accident. Let's not take it to heart." He was really good-looking, with handsome and sharp features. He exuded an air of vitality without a hint of gloom all over his body. When he smiled, his eyes sparkled, and when I bullied him too much, the corners of his eyes would always turn a bit red. I was really fascinated by such a Julian. It took me a lot of effort to keep him by my side. After asking the doctor about my condition, Julian suddenly became downcast. After carefully feeding me the soup spoon by spoon, he looked serious and said earnestly, "Sister, although I haven't graduated yet and don't have much experience, and I can't help you with your career," he lowered his head, his eyes looking gloomy and lonely, and his voice was low and hoarse, "but I'm trying hard to grow into a safe haven for you. Sister, could you wait for me a little longer, please?" Julian held my hand, rubbed his face against my palm, and said in a hoarse voice, "Sister, I hope you'll call me first whenever you encounter something. Do you know that the doctor said if it had been a little later, you would have." My palm felt wet. I suppressed the surging moisture in my eyes and bent down to kiss the top of his head. "What are you doing?" Gabriel's angry voice came from the doorway. He suddenly rushed in front of us and raised his fist to punch Julian hard beside me. Because he was supporting me, Julian could only endure that punch. "Sister, are you okay?" I looked up and saw the glaring wound at the corner of his mouth. My heart sank, and I quickly got up, wanting to call the nurse to bring some medicine to wipe it for him. But in an instant, I was pulled up roughly. Gabriel's eyes turned red with rage, and he gritted his teeth and questioned me. "Vivian, tell me, who the hell is he? No wonder you've been ignoring me and haven't come to apologize to me these days. So you've hooked up with someone else. You're such a slut." Before he could finish his words, he was punched in the face. The whole person was beaten and staggered back a few steps, hitting the wall behind him heavily. Julian shook his hand, his expression cold. "She's still sick. Don't touch her with your dirty hands." I took Julian's hand and squeezed it gently. When I looked up, I met Gabriel's eyes full of humiliation and anger. He endured it again and finally squeezed out a few words from his throat. "Vivian, I'll give you a chance." "Explain." I looked up, looking at Gabriel's face full of resentment and extreme arrogance. He was so sure that I would definitely give in, coax him, and apologize to him. Although I didn't know where his confidence came from, at this moment, a strong sense of disgust and weariness suddenly welled up from the bottom of my heart. When I went abroad, he didn't come to see me off, and there wasn't even a message from him. Considering that he was sad, as soon as I got off the plane, I couldn't wait to call him. But the calls that couldn't get through and the messages that couldn't be sent clearly told me that Gabriel had blocked all my contact information. For a whole 5 years, he always sent me sporadic messages saying he missed me. And from time to time, he sent me intimate photos of him with different girls. But he never let me contact him. I clearly remembered that there were 26 girls in total. And a total of 574 photos. He was just like a playboy who toyed with people's feelings. He wantonly enjoyed those girls falling into the sweet traps he casually set, and he used them without any guilt as a tool to force me to return to the country. I looked through the information I had found and remembered what my mother said: "That boy from the Gabriel family is completely useless now." While agreeing with it, I also felt a deep sense of sorrow. Gabriel and I were no longer on the same path from then on. So, I immediately took back all my lingering feelings for him and never really had true feelings for him again. I sighed and asked him in a calm tone, "Gabriel, what kind of porridge do you think I like?" He snorted coldly, seeming to think that I had asked a stupid question. "Of course it's seafood porridge." Before Gabriel could finish speaking, Julian interrupted casually. What she hates the most is seafood porridge because she can't stand the smell. Gabriel was stunned for a moment and then immediately retorted angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about? She used to order it every time." Halfway through his words, he seemed to remember something. His expression suddenly changed, and his eyes looking at me were tinged with a bit of panic. I smiled and for the first time made things clear. "Remember now, Master Gabriel? It wasn't that I ordered it every time. It was that you never bothered to ask me. Because subconsciously, you just thought I must like the same thing as you." Gabriel seemed to sense what I was going to say. His face turned pale and a glimmer of pleading flashed in his eyes as he looked at me. "Vivian," I just pretended not to see it and continued on my own. "You resented me for going abroad and leaving you struggling here alone. But I never stopped you from accompanying me or coming to see me. It's you who immersed yourself in the drama of being abandoned and couldn't get out of it for a long time. Only in this way could you take it for granted to enjoy a life of luxury and dissipation. You always thought those 5 years were tough for you, but you never thought about how I persevered." I never cried to him about the hardships I endured. Because I always thought that Gabriel and I would be people on the same wavelength. We would both strive to climb and meet at the peak. But later, from the things he did one after another, I found that Gabriel himself was just a person who couldn't be helped. Like mud that couldn't be plastered on the wall. I could force myself step by step to that position for the sake of my family and to safeguard the hard work they had put in for half of their lives. But you can only rely on your family. I paused for a moment and a hint of sarcasm gradually appeared on my face. "Gabriel, if something goes wrong with the Gabriel Group now, do you think you can handle it?" He looked at me in astonishment. "What do you mean? Are you going to take action against my family?" I didn't answer directly. "I just want to say that you've long fallen behind me. So, why do you think I would want a useless person who is inferior to me in every way?" When Olivia came to see me, I was dealing with the projects given up by the Gabriel family. After receiving her message, I tried hard to recall who she was. It turned out that she was the girl that Gabriel said he had found to take care of him that day. After figuring it out, I pushed the documents to my special assistant beside me. "Postpone the meeting for half an hour." I put on my coat and went downstairs and found the coffee shop that Olivia had chosen. When she saw me coming, she immediately stood up. "Miss Vivienne." I nodded in response, sat down, and carefully looked at the girl sitting across from me. Her skin was fair and slightly pinkish, and her lips were soft and full, a standard beauty, the kind of beauty that could make Gabriel's heart flutter. Thinking of this, I couldn't help smiling and relaxed my posture. I casually leaned on the sofa and slightly nodded to her. "Miss Olivia, what do you want to talk to me about?" Olivia looked at me, her eyes gradually turning red, and her voice was soft and gentle. "Miss Vivian, I slept with Gabriel." I raised my eyebrows and took a sip of coffee. "If you want someone to take responsibility, shouldn't you go to Gabriel?" Olivia quickly shook her head and her tears fell one by one on the table in front of her. "I just came to seek Miss Vivian's opinion." She hesitated for a while and said in a low voice, "I heard that Miss Vivian and Gabriel are childhood sweethearts, so you must know him well. Do you think he will allow me to stay by his side?" I caught a glimpse of her look and smiled subtly. "Miss Olivia, in your opinion, what do you think of the boys outside?" As I said this, I pointed at the door. Olivia followed my gesture and looked over. Julian was leaning bored against the wall by the door waiting for me. He was also a standard handsome guy, with a tall and slender figure, broad shoulders, and a narrow waist. The slightly dazzling sunlight outside made his appearance a bit blurry, but he was still a breathtaking beauty, a beauty that could fascinate me. Olivia looked at him and then at me, her eyes full of confusion. She bit her lip and struggled for a while before asking me somewhat hesitantly, "He's very good looking. He should be a nice person, Miss Vivian. Do you mean you want to introduce him to me?" Hearing this, the smile on my face faded a lot. She was really so stupid that I couldn't help wanting to scold her. I took a tissue, leaned forward to cover her face, and gently wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes. "Didn't you notice that since he came, his eyes have been only on me?" Olivia understood what I meant. There was a moment of panic on her face, and her face also flushed. "I'm sorry, Miss Vivian. I overthought it." After lowering her eyes for a few moments, she took a breath and said, "Don't you love Gabriel?" I met her gaze, and the corner of my lip curled up almost imperceptibly. Why do you ask that? Olivia pointed at Julian, who was quietly looking at me outside the door, and said, if you love Gabriel, he wouldn't exist. You see, anyone would know that if you really love someone, how could you allow the appearance of a third party? I didn't answer but just smiled and said to her, don't regard me as your imaginary enemy. What I want is absolute control and equal respect. To control the loyalty in love and marriage and respect the differences between each other in career and life. Enough is enough. I think Olivia can understand. She's an ambitious person. She knows what she wants and also knows how to take every next step in her life. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stood out from those 20-plus tools back then and stayed by Gabriel's side until now. This is enough to prove that Olivia is a woman who is sober enough. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come to test me today. Rather than saying that she came to seek my opinion under the pretext that I knew Gabriel, it's better to say that she came specifically to test whether I would marry Gabriel. If I would, she knew that with my personality, I definitely wouldn't tolerate her existence. Under the premise of maximizing benefits, she would obediently take the medicine she should take and then come to ask me for a considerable amount of compensation. It was compensation for her leaving Gabriel and guaranteeing that she wouldn't get pregnant. If I wouldn't marry Gabriel, then she could feel at ease to work on Gabriel, including not taking medicine after the event. She was very smart and sober, and I appreciated her even more. Sure enough, after that, Olivia never came to see me again. On the contrary, she started going in and out with Gabriel. And Gabriel, never tired of changing numbers to send me photos of the two of them. As long as you come back, I'll break up with her immediately. I ignored him because I had to deal with a certain puppy's jealousy. When the sweat on Julian's body dripped onto my face, I slowly hugged his back. Don't worry. I'm yours. The next time I met Gabriel was at a charity auction evening party. I was on the arm of Julian and bumped into him face to face. He had a gloomy expression on his face. Gabriel gritted his teeth and glared at me fiercely. Vivian, you're really going backwards. You're with a young kid. I clicked my tongue softly and replied casually, there's nothing I can do. Young people are good in every way, especially in terms of stamina. Gabriel's face turned from red to white and then to blue. I was too lazy to pay attention to him anymore. I took Julian's hand and found our seats to sit down. I had to bid for that ruby necklace today because the wife of our business partner liked it. Being good at socializing and catering to others' preferences is a compulsory course for every businessman. There was always a burning gaze fixed on me from behind. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Julian snorted coldly and gave him a fierce glare, almost getting angry like a fluffy ragdoll cat that didn't get enough sleep in winter. I couldn't help laughing. He pulled me over angrily, bent his head and bit the tip of my finger gently but not painfully. Sister, you only bully me. Soon the staff on the stage brought up the treasure I wanted. That intricate and beautiful necklace shone brightly under the lights. I didn't bother to listen to his introduction and immediately raised my sign to bid after the starting price was announced. As soon as the auctioneer announced my bid, Gabriel followed suit. He seemed to be competing with me. Every time I bid, he would follow. After several times like this, I got annoyed. While increasing the price, I sent a message to Gabriel. Stop competing. I want to give this to the lady. After sending the message, I waved my mobile phone at Gabriel to signal him to look. Sure enough, he didn't increase the price this time. Julian leaned over to take a look, his peach blossom eyes slightly raised. You're setting a trap for him. I withdrew my gaze, leaned sideways on Julian's shoulder and whispered, although I could still ensure that I win the bid for this necklace if we keep competing. But the cost would be too high. It's not worth it. It's better to show weakness to him ambiguously now. Anyway, he's stupid. The auctioneer in the venue finalized the ownership of the necklace with a final hammer. I went to pay for and receive the necklace contentedly with Julian. As soon as the auction ended, Gabriel rushed over and grabbed my arm. Come back with me. My mother is at home tonight. The heat from his grip on my arm made me frown. Seeing that I was uncomfortable, Julian reached out and pushed Gabriel's hand away. Mr. Gabriel, you're offending Vivian. Vivian. Gabriel gritted his teeth and called my name. Come back with me. I faced his furious gaze and asked with a smile, "What nonsense are you talking about? Why should I go back with you?" Gabriel's face was a picture of changing emotions. It took him a long time to understand. His face was so gloomy that it seemed water could drip from it. "Didn't you prepare that necklace to give to my mother?" I waved my hand at him and left on Julian's arm. "Oh, when I said I wanted to give it to a lady, I didn't mean Gabriel's mother." After I played tricks on him that day, Gabriel didn't contact me for many days. I originally thought that he had finally understood my attitude thoroughly. To my great surprise, he was planning something big. 6 days after Gabriel disappeared, he suddenly sent invitations to those previous guests. And he announced to the public that he would hold an engagement banquet for me to make up for the previous one. When I saw this message, I was enjoying a romantic dinner at home with Julian. He swiped his phone and read the message several times, his eyes growing darker. The faint smell of alcohol surrounded me, and the man's imposing body got closer to me. In the instant when I was distracted, a hand with well-defined knuckles wrapped around my waist. He gently bit the back of my neck with his teeth. As if to vent his anger, he left a slightly itchy tooth mark. "Sister." Julian's voice was a bit hoarse. It carried some indescribable meaning, like fear or sadness. He held my wrist with his other hand and pressed it above my head. "I want to always have a place by your side." His voice with a touch of moisture hit my heart, causing ripples. I softened my eyes and coaxed him gently, "You've always wanted to watch the sunrise. Do you want to go?" On the way up the mountain, I lowered my eyelashes to hide the mockery in my eyes. Gabriel still wanted to use this childish way to force me to show up and submit to him, but his face was worthless in front of me now. After thinking for a while, I sent several red envelopes in the family group and then sent a message. "The Vivian family and the Gabriel family will never be related by marriage again. Everyone, please ignore it." After sending the message, I turned to look at Julian, who was driving carefully. My heart was at peace. The top of the mountain was dark. Julian carefully held my hand. He found a safe place and helped me sit down. I looked down and was shocked speechless by the sight in front of me for a moment. The endless darkness dyed the deep sky and the earth. The starlight all over the sky and the continuous lights of the whole city under our feet complemented each other. The summer night wind blew gently, carrying the smell of grass and trees. I couldn't help being attracted and stood up. Julian slowly hugged me from behind. "Looking at the beautiful scenery, will sister feel better?" I was silent for a while. "How did you know I was in a bad mood?" He tightened his arms and rested his chin in the hollow of my neck. "I know. You dislike trouble the most, but he's always making things difficult for you." I didn't say anything. I couldn't tell what kind of mood I was in. All in all, it had only been 8 months since Julian and I met and got together. And what about Gabriel and me? From when we were just learning to walk to now, it had been a full 24 years. Julian, who had only known me for 8 months, could easily sense what I disliked and what made me uncomfortable. But did Gabriel really not know? Not necessarily. He just didn't care. For him, it seemed that as long as he could satisfy his own emotions, he could do anything. As for other people's feelings, they were not worth mentioning. I finally figured out the problem that had been bothering me all along. Why could Gabriel act so affectionate towards me on the one hand, while hurting and betraying me recklessly on the other hand? It turns out that it has nothing to do with time or place. It's all about whether there's love or not. Immersing himself in the drama of abandonment allows him to use it as an excuse to shirk responsibility. He doesn't have to keep up with me and shoulder the expectations of our family and that responsibility. Then he can justifiably enjoy the dissipated and luxurious life that he likes. From the beginning to the end, the only person he loves is himself. For such a selfish person, what is there that's worth lingering on? I turned my head and found that Julian had been looking at me all along. The corners of his mouth were slightly curved, and there were bits and pieces of glimmering light in his pupils. There were countless stars here and the lights of thousands of households. But in Julian's eyes, there was only me. Perhaps the wind blew into my eyes, and suddenly I felt a bit blurry in front of me. Lowering my eyes and blinking a few times, I slowly leaned over and kissed him. Julian was stunned for a moment, but soon took the initiative. Even the kisses of a young boy were scorching hot without any restraint. Just a spark could start a prairie fire. In his unrestrained and uncontrolled frenzy, I just felt that my rationality was burned out along with this heat. Even the wind seemed to freeze, forced to be trapped here and heat up together. When Julian clamped my hands and raised them above my head, I closed my eyes, enjoying the pleasure he brought me with delight. Just let it be as wanton as I like. Let me follow my heart and sink into indulgence with the passionate Julian. When I got out of the car and returned home the next day, Gabriel was waiting at my doorstep. He looked as if he hadn't slept all night, and his whole body exuded a sense of dejection. "Where did you go yesterday? Why didn't you attend our engagement?" Gabriel's eyes froze on my neck. I heard his voice turn cold inch by inch at that moment. "Vivian, where on earth did you go last night?" After saying that, he suddenly stepped forward and grabbed my arm with such force that I frowned. "Gabriel, don't go crazy in front of me." He stared fixedly at my neck and a tinge of red gradually appeared in his eyes. "Tell me, what is this?" I suddenly remembered Julian, who had been biting me all over my body tirelessly last night, looking at Gabriel's ferocious look as if he wanted to devour me. I guessed that the marks left by the young lad on my neck must be quite conspicuous. "Do you know that I waited for you for a whole day and night? Not only did you not come, but also," Gabriel's voice slowly trailed off and his eyes were gloomy. "How could you do this to me?" I broke free from his grip and the words I said stabbed right at his heart. "Gabriel, I hope you can understand the phrase, part on good terms." Gabriel was stunned for a moment and the anger in his eyes slowly faded away. Finally, I even saw an emotion called sadness in his eyes. How strange. Gabriel stood there motionless, just looking at me like that. After a long while, his voice trembled a little. "I'll change all the habits that you don't like, and I won't lose my temper with you anymore. Vivian, let's start over, okay?" Suddenly, I felt so bored. If he had said this 5 years ago, I might have considered it. But now, "Sorry, Gabriel, I'm already with Julian." After saying that, regardless of how he felt, I walked around him and went straight home. Before today, Gabriel might have always thought that I was just throwing a tantrum with him. That's why he prepared this engagement banquet without notifying me. As for Julian, he didn't even take him seriously. But I just think that Julian is better than him in every way. He's more considerate, gentler, and has more potential. More importantly, his family background is not as good as Gabriel's, and he knows how to be grateful. Whether I fall in love with him or not in the future, he will never overstep me. Negative news about the person in power of the Vivian family spread all over the internet overnight. The reason why the situation was so serious was simply that someone in the company identified themselves and pointed out that in the field of building materials mainly operated by the Vivian Group, there had been no upgrades in the recent projects according to the requirements of the country. As long as the matter was true, it would be easy for the ambitious noble families to short-sell the Vivian family. I calmly listened to the report from my special assistant and then turned to look at the person sitting opposite me. I slightly raised my eyebrows. "Is this your punishment for my not being accommodating?" Yes and no. Gabriel, who was sitting opposite me, slowly opened his mouth. He looked at me with affectionate and tender eyes. "Vivian, I have to admit that you're too outstanding and too stubborn. As long as the Vivian family doesn't fall, you won't rely on me." Compared to before, Gabriel had become a lot more composed. Presumably, he had received some guidance from his father. I looked at the gloom between his eyebrows and slowly laughed. "I underestimated you." "What a pity, Gabriel. You underestimated me too." Gabriel didn't say yes or no. Instead, he just turned his head and stated his purpose. "The Vivian family is going bankrupt. Vivian, marry me and I'll ensure that you'll never have to worry about food and clothing." When he said this, there was a look of certainty about getting me in his eyes. I looked dispirited and tapped the rim of the cup with my fingers. "Don't rush. Let's wait a little longer. What if there's a turn of events?" During the waiting period, the calls on the internet for a strict investigation into the materials of the Vivian Group grew louder and louder. I could quite understand the feelings of netizens. The downfall and the struggle among wealthy families was a source of entertainment to relieve boredom in their dull lives. However, once it involved the safety of buildings, it had to be taken seriously. So when the police cars stopped at the entrance of the Vivian Group, the whole internet paid close attention, and many live streamers gathered at the entrance to broadcast live. Everyone who was concerned about this matter was waiting for a result. And the result was that it was true that the Vivian Group had used illegal materials. However, it was a scheme deliberately set up by a certain senior executive of the Vivian Group who had received a hefty payment from others and colluded with outsiders in order to bring down the Vivian Group. And as early as when he purchased that batch of illegal materials, I had already gone to the police station in advance to file a record. 3 days later, a serious safety issue suddenly broke out in the shopping mall under construction by the Gabriel Group. There was shoddy workmanship in the design and inferior materials were passed off as good ones. The finished product was very likely to collapse due to long-term use. The brands that had originally planned to move in immediately terminated their cooperation. Under all kinds of problems, the construction of the shopping mall had to be suspended, and the losses incurred every day were immeasurable. Under the pressure from the Vivian Group, the Gabriel Group soon suffered a serious shortage of funds. The Gabriel family was in a frantic state. When Gabriel came to see me, he looked dejected. "Vivian, do you really have to be so ruthless?" I remembered what he had said that day. "As long as you marry me, you'll still be a young lady who never has to worry about food and clothing." Gabriel had looked affectionate at that time. But it couldn't hide the fact that he wanted to lock me in a cage and turn me into a canary. Since that was the case, of course, I wouldn't show any mercy. After that, my parents and I had been waiting all the time, waiting for the Gabriel family's next move. Until 2 weeks later, my special assistant knocked on the door of my office. She had a look of joy on her face. "Vivian, they've issued new shares." Soon, the Gabriel family held the first shareholders' meeting after surviving the public opinion storm. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and immediately spotted the people hurrying along below at a glance. Footsteps came from outside the door as the shareholders rushed in. When the last footsteps echoed in the corridor, they were so heavy and so familiar. After Gabriel took his seat, my special assistant's voice rang out in the quiet meeting room. "Gabriel, this is the current largest shareholder of the Gabriel Group." I raised my eyes and looked at Gabriel with a smile as if I had been expecting this. "Look, I told you. Just wait a little longer and there will definitely be a turn of events." Gabriel's expression almost cracked. When the meeting ended, the shareholders left one after another. Gabriel's tall figure blocked in front of me, and his eyes were deep. "Vivian, you arranged all of this, didn't you?" I lowered my head to reply to Julian's message first and then looked at the man in front of me. "Didn't you know that your father bribed the senior executive of the Vivian Group?" I looked at him with a smile, but my eyes turned a bit cold. Businessmen will stop at nothing to achieve profits. I don't want to pursue this matter. But if you can't manage your company well and are outmatched, don't blame me. The business world is ruthless, with wolves lurking everywhere. In the face of that huge piece of fat, big business opportunity, who can guarantee not to be tempted? I've said it. I love money more. Look, taking over the Gabriel Group doesn't require getting married. Here we are. I've got it. After leaving the Gabriel Group, Julian was already waiting downstairs with my favorite flowers in his hand. After getting into the car, I reached out to put on the seat belt. But my hand was pressed down. Someone leaned over and covered my lips with a kind of tenderness that didn't allow me to dodge. The pressed hand was then held in the palm. A ring with body temperature encircled my ring finger. It was firmly fastened on my hand. I turned my head to look. Julian's earlobes were like jade with a smoky pink hue. "Julian, do you want to marry me?" Julian didn't hesitate for a moment and nodded sincerely. "Vivian, I want to marry me. When I saw this ring, I couldn't help but want to buy it and give it to you. This is my determination. But you have the right to reject me." Julian looked into my eyes without flinching or avoiding. A tiny me was reflected in his eyes. He was very nervous but also very determined. "I will always put you first and always be loyal to you." Seeing that I didn't say anything, Julian became more and more nervous, and his fingers subconsciously curled up. "Ah, how cute." I slowly burst out laughing with my eyes curving into crescent shapes. I took Julian's hand. On his hand with distinct knuckles, the matching ring that was the same as mine was shining brightly. I lowered my head, "Kiss that ring. Then I'll gratefully accept your offer."